Blink Publishing presents the Fred West tapes, Secrets of the Fred and Rose West Murder Investigation, written and read by Howard Sounes. This audiobook is dedicated, with my love, to Dina. Are you listening, Dina? I start the book with an exchange between police officer D.C. Hazel Savage and Fred West. D.C. Savage said to Fred, "You're enjoying it, aren't you?" Fred West said, "Yeah, why not?" "I don't know. I don't understand it." "You will in the end," said Fred. Introduction. Over 30 years ago, when I was a 29-year-old reporter working for a national newspaper, I broke one of the first big stories about the Fred and Rose West murder case. Between 1967 and 1987, Fred West murdered 12 young women and children in and around the city of Gloucester, a little more than 100 miles west of London. Most of the crimes committed with his wife, Rose. As rare as serial murders are, married serial killers are exceptionally unusual. That made the story a sensation. A news reporter gets used to covering a lot of different stories, most of which are here today, gone tomorrow. When inside information about the West case was first leaked to me in 1994, I knew at once that this story was special. It was profoundly weird, with a mysterious quality that intrigued me to find out more. In revealing that the West's home at 25 Cromwell Street in Gloucester was filled with human remains, a colleague and I gave the case its newspaper name, The House of Horrors. I am not especially proud of that. It wasn't primarily my idea. Frankly, there was little skill involved in my breaking the story. It was luck, as I explain later. And much of the subsequent reporting I did for my paper was unexceptional. However, I seized the opportunity to write a book about the case, alongside my day job, and in writing what became Fred and Rose, I gave all my energy to the story, telling it as well as I could without newspaper hyperbole. I wanted to write a quality book that would still be read after my newspaper clippings had turned to dust. I wanted to capture the essence of the case. Fred and Rose was a bestseller on publication in 1995, and it has remained in print. I left newspapers to write books full-time a couple of years later, when I had a second book in hand. As I made a new career for myself as an author, I moved away from crime to concentrate on writing carefully researched biographies of exceptional people whose life and work inspired me, including Bob Dylan and the writer Charles Bukowski. However, the ongoing success of Fred and Rose kept pulling me back. When 25 years passed and the book continued to sell, I decided to update it. I also made a podcast series that went to #1 in the podcast charts, and I made the first of several television documentaries about the Wests, which was the start of a third interlinked career as a TV producer. From the beginning, explaining the Wests to myself was my primary motivation. Understanding Fred and Rose and their relationship was an investigative challenge and an intellectual stretch. The subject was so fascinating that I would have written that first book for nothing. What sort of people killed together as part of their marriage? What was going on in their heads to drive them to commit such awful acts? The crimes were so extreme that I had never imagined such things possible. This takes a lot of thinking about and research to understand. It is the nub of the thing that gets a person sufficiently interested in a subject to write a book about it. The backstory and psychology was and remains as fascinating to me as what the Wests actually did. That is true of all my books, which now includes 3 crime stories. The Wests, of course, Heist, which is a story about a robbery gang, and This Woman, a book about Myra Hindley in prison. Uncovering the truth about Fred and Rose has been a long quest. Crime is secretive. Criminals hide their actions and motivations, and all the facts were not available in the 1990s. I couldn't speak to everybody I wanted to while the case was unfolding. As the years have passed, however, I have met many more people, and I have found missing pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, fitting the whole picture together in my mind. Recently, I had a breakthrough when I was able to listen to recordings of over 100 hours of Fred West's police interviews. I had heard some of these interviews before, but suddenly I was able to hear them all. Criminals often say little or nothing in custody, replying no comment to police questions. Unusually, Fred talked almost endlessly. He gave detectives his life story, from his childhood up to the time of his arrest, including the story of his 2 marriages and his many crimes. He told lies, but he also admitted to the murders, and he led the police to the graves of his victims, so his interviews cannot be dismissed. Importantly, even when he lied, he revealed himself, as people do, in every word that he spoke, by the way in which he spoke. Tape recordings of these remarkable interviews feature in a new Netflix documentary series, Fred and Rose West, a British horror story, a project I initiated and helped to produce, and that I also appear in. Transcripts of the interviews are part of this new book, more than are featured in the series, complemented by all the knowledge I have accumulated. As well as Fred's interviews, I quote from Rose West's police interviews, and I draw on witness evidence. I have met and interviewed most of the key people in the story over the years, including members of the West family and the victims' families, who have helped me to understand the human cost of these crimes. I bring all this information together in this new book, which focuses on Fred West in the interview room, reporting his words verbatim, with a few light corrections for clarity, from his arrest until his death. As he was questioned, a serial murder story was revealed. As I listened to Fred talk to the police, I felt that I got to know the man as never before. His rough country voice, his quaint turns of phrase, the twisted obsessions that formed his character all became as familiar to me as someone I knew personally. I felt that I had got inside his mind at last, as you will. Much of what Fred said is disturbing, and it can be shocking. Where he lied or evaded the truth, I have interjected to explain and help guide you through the labyrinth of the interviews to what I hope is a final, complete understanding of Fred and Rose West. Chapter 1. Heather Under the Patio. Thursday, the 24th of February, 1994, day 1 of the investigation, Gloucester Central Police Station. A scruffy, middle-aged man in working clothes, short, with curly brown hair, bushy sideburns and bushy eyebrows, a broken, misshapen nose and dull blue eyes, walked out of the rain into Gloucester Central Police Station at 7:50 p.m. and asked to see Detective Constable Hazel Savage. The police station was within a large office building in the centre of Gloucester, one of Britain's smallest cities, containing divisional headquarters. The visitor wanted to know why the police were at his house, upsetting his wife. DC Savage took him to an interview room on the first floor, where they were joined by a second officer. A cassette tape recorder was switched on. DC Savage began. "First of all, can you give us your full name?" Fred West replied, "Frederick Warder Stephen West." "And your age?" 52. "Thank you. And your address?" 25 Cromwell Street, Gloucester. DC Savage asked, "I don't think you mind if we call you Fred. Is that right?" Fred had no problem with that. He was Fred to everyone. 3 years Fred's junior, Hazel Savage had been a CID officer since 1968, and she had known Fred for virtually her entire career. He had been in a lot of trouble with the police over the years, though nothing like this. Things are happening at your house at the moment, she told Fred. The police have been there this afternoon and they are, in fact, digging up your back patio. You'll remember that when we last spoke, we were concerned about Heather. Heather was the eldest daughter of Fred and his wife, Rose West. She hadn't been seen since she was 16, nearly 7 years ago. Let's go back to the beginning, Fred, and talk about how and when Heather disappeared. Heather wanted to disappear, right? Fred spoke as a Herefordshire countryman, dropping the H on his daughter's name, so she became Heather. He appeared relaxed, even friendly, but it soon became apparent that he was a crude man. He told D.C. Savage that his daughter left home after a family row to do with an older female friend of hers, who, he said, wore a very short skirt, just about to the bottom of her knickers. You know, if she bent or lifted that, you could see everything. Said D.C. Savage, who was used to Fred's smutty talk. He said that this woman was his daughter's lessee friend. Fred was sex-mad and far from politically correct in how he spoke about women. He said that Heather and her friend planned to run off together. D.C. Savage told Fred that she had made extensive inquiries, and there was no trace of Heather since 1987. No medical records, bank or social security paper trail, most unusual for a young woman who would now be in her 20s. The detective had a direct manner. So, do you think she's dead or alive? She asked Fred bluntly. Fred West replied, Alive, as far as I know. Why do you think anything else? Suddenly, Fred added something which he thought might be of interest. He said that he had seen Heather recently in Birmingham. She was dealing drugs. Before she left home, he said, Heather had given drugs to some of his other children, including his youngest son, Barry. Heather had also been disrespectful to her mother, which caused trouble at home. Every time Rolls spoke to her, she just bloody and sodded her and walked away. So they gave Heather money, and she left with her friend in the miniskirt, who drove a mini car. He had kept in touch with his daughter, however, assuring the police that me and Heather was very close. D.C. Savage had heard another story. The police had spoken to some of the West children. It was a large family, and they said that their dad may have killed Heather and buried her under the back garden patio at 25 Cromwell Street. They say that it was a family talk when they used to ask you about Heather that she was under the patio. Savage told Fred, Now, if that is true, and you're laughing, oh, for God's sake, I mean, do you believe it? He chuckled. I mean, you're digging me place up, so carry on doing it. D.C. Hazel Savage replied, That's right. And obviously, if there's anybody under there, Fred, we will find them. But if there is nobody under there, you would have dug that up for nothing. But you'll put my patio back. Fred didn't seem at all worried. He gave the impression of being a carefree fellow who knew his rights and would be quick to demand compensation if, as he suggested, the police were making a big mistake. The police had been at 25 Cromwell Street all afternoon. Rose was at home with her 21-year-old second daughter, May, when 5 plainclothes police officers, including D.C. Savage, arrived at 1:25 p.m. May answered the door to them. There were more officers sitting outside in a van. The detectives asked to see Rose, who was watching the soap opera Neighbours on TV. They told her that they had a warrant to search the house and garden for Heather. This is stupid, said Rose. As Hazel Savage tried to talk to Rose, search team officers wearing blue overalls and Wellington boots started to troop through the house with shovels, heading for the back garden. The West's eldest son, Steve, who was 20, arrived home and told the police that they couldn't start digging in the garden until his dad got back from work. He tried to call his father on his mobile telephone, but he couldn't get through to him. Rose, becoming more and more agitated, called Fred's boss, Derek Thompson, who employed Fred as a maintenance man. Rose rang me. Where's Fred? I need Fred. The police are here. They're going to dig the garden up. I thought it sounded serious. Derek said that Fred was in Frampton Mansell in the Cotswolds spraying a roof. There was no signal there, so Derek rang the landline and spoke to the homeowner who got Fred to the phone. Derek told him that the police were at his house and Rose wanted him back urgently. I only spoke a couple of words and he was gone. That was the last I ever spoke to him. But Fred didn't go straight home. The house, 25 Cromwell Street, was an old, semi-detached property on a dingy inner-city street where many of the Edwardian houses had been converted into cheap bedsits. The West house was 3 stories with 2 rooms on each floor. The ground floor had been extended and there was a cellar. A tiny front area facing the street was enclosed within a low brick wall with railings. Unusually, there were 2 gates, a regular garden gate and a larger pair of double gates that protected the front door. This was on the side of the house, part of the extension which joined the property to the Seventh-day Adventist church next door. A lucky horseshoe was fixed over the front door, and to the side of this was an ornate house sign, the address 25 Cromwell Street, picked out in scrolled iron. The Wests were proud of their home. Inside the house was a warren of shabby little rooms decorated in mismatching scraps of carpet and wallpaper, with bodged home improvements by Fred, whose work tools were strewn about the place. A portrait of Rose hung on one of the walls, a silhouette against a blood-red sunset. Fred painted the picture when he was in prison years ago. He also made the miniature model gypsy caravan in prison. He made it out of matchsticks. It was a prized ornament. A pin-up poster of a woman in a negligee was stuck to a door, the model beckoning visitors with her crooked finger to come upstairs, where there were surprises. It was almost 4 hours before Fred returned home, though he was only 20 miles away when his boss told him that the police were there. What he did in that time remains a mystery. Meanwhile, the police photographed and videoed 25 Cromwell Street inside and out. Then the searchers started to clear the narrow backyard, a row of conifers on one side, the wall of the church on the other. At the bottom of the garden was a gate that gave access to St. Michael's Square. Against the church wall was a barbecue area and a shed, which the younger West children used as a Wendy playhouse. The police took down the washing line and shifted the dustbin out of their way, also moving a concrete lion. They started levering up the patio slabs. "Here's the first slab being removed," said the officer videotaping the operation. The team knocked off about 5:30 p.m. and departed, leaving a constable on duty to make sure nothing was tampered with overnight. Fred walked in the door shortly afterwards, as if he had been waiting for the police search team to go, acting as though nothing was wrong. He spoke to Rose in a whisper, then went to the police station nearby. While Fred gave his interview, other officers came back to the house to interview Rose upstairs on the first floor in what the Wests called their black magic bar, the old front bedroom which Fred had converted into his idea of a Hawaiian-style bar, one wall of which was decorated with a mural of an exotic holiday destination. It was here that Rose entertained her visitors, including men who paid her for sex. Fred watched or listened to their lovemaking on a speaker attached to hidden microphones in the bedroom on the floor above, top floor, where Rose had a 4-poster bed with the word cunt on the pelmet. Rose West was 40, small, dark and plump, with short brown hair and spectacles. Born in Barnstable in 1953, she had a slight Devonshire accent, though she had lived in Gloucestershire since she was a child. In contrast to her husband, she was belligerent and defensive with the police, sitting on the sofa smoking silk cut as the officers tried to question her. DS Terry Onions began. Right then, Mrs. West, this interview has been tape recorded. We are in your own house and we are upstairs in the bar room, whatever you want to call it, at 25 Cromwell Street. Can you tell me your name, please, for the benefit of the tape? Rose replied, You don't know who I am? Reminded that she was not under arrest, she retorted in her shrill voice, If I'm not under arrest, why are you here? She was asked about Heather. Rather than show motherly concern for her missing firstborn child, she described a stubborn, awkward girl. I'm afraid we didn't hit it off that well, she said. I had a problem with her because I knew what she was. DS Onions asked, And what was that then? Rose said, She was a lesbian, as far as I knew. It was the same odd story Fred was telling the police. Rose argued that Heather's lesbianism was a bad influence on her other children, who she wanted to lead normal lives. When Rose told Heather that boys might want to get to know her, Heather had made it clear that she wasn't interested in boys. She said, If a boy touched me, I would put a brick over his fucking head. So Rose gave Heather £600 to leave home. She was asked what bank account she drew this money from to verify her story. Rose exclaimed, I cannot fucking remember. It's a bloody long time ago. DS Cherry Onions said, Well, yeah, but I'm just saying. What do you think I am, a bloody computer? No, I'm just asking you. If you had any brains at all, you could find her. It can't be that difficult. Rose sounded angry at the police and angry at a daughter who, she suggested, had abandoned the family. Asked if she had tried to find Heather, Rose complained further. Look, she said, when you brought up a girl like that and you've done everything you can, I mean, this is 16 years of a child you're talking about. You imagine the flipping work I put in. Then they turn around and they just turn their back on you and say, I don't want to talk to you anymore, don't want to see you anymore. She has always been an obstinate child. DS Onions said, Has Fred seen her lately, do you know? No. I know he had several phone calls off her, but she didn't want to speak to me. As he questioned Rose, Detective Sergeant Onions referred to a recent police investigation into child abuse allegations against the West. Look, just drop that one, Rose snapped. I've had all those charges put to me. They've all been flaming dropped. Her 5 youngest children had been taken into care as a result of the investigation. DS Onions asked her, What about the family? Have you heard what the children have been saying in care, that she's under the patio? Have you heard that? Have you? It had become a family joke, the kids saying that their missing sister was buried under the patio, 3 paving stones up and 9 across. Rose muttered that her stepdaughter, Anna Marie, Fred's daughter from his first marriage, had said something, but she didn't know where the story originated. Several of the children changed their names to distance themselves from their past, including Anna Marie West, who later altered her first name to Anne Marie. I have kept to her original registered name, which she was known by as a child. DS Onions said, We are going to dig up the patio. Rose replied, I ain't got nothing to worry about. DS Onions again, At the end of the day, we've got to find out where Heather is, haven't we? Because we've got a bit of a mystery on, haven't we? Rose said, I'm sure it's only a mystery because you want it to be a mystery. Onions said that he had a terrible feeling that Heather was dead, and she had been dust and bones for years. Oh, you're lovely, aren't you? Said Rose. Having attended the police station voluntarily, Fred was free to return home that evening, arriving back around 9:30. By 1994, Fred and Rose had been together for almost 25 years, man and wife at 25 Cromwell Street since 1972, having married shortly after they moved in. They were a close couple with a complicated family. There were children they'd had together, children from Fred's first marriage, and Rose's children by other men. 10 children in total. Some had left home. 5 had been taken into care. Some were missing. One was feared dead. Only May and Steve were at home in 1994. They watched in surprise as Mum and Dad took the dogs out for a walk that evening, which was unheard of. But a late-night dog walk around the park at the end of the street gave Fred and Rose an opportunity to talk in private. When they returned, Fred stripped to his underpants and watched the evening news on TV, as he always did. Then the West spoke together in whispers as they looked out over their garden. The patio slabs were up, and the police had hired a mechanical digger. They would start excavating with this machine first thing tomorrow morning. It wouldn't take them long to find Heather, if Heather was under the patio. The next morning, at 11:15, D.C. Savage returned with some colleagues and asked Rose, who was again watching television, for her mother Daisy Lett's address, so they could ask Mrs. Letts if she knew where her granddaughter was. Rose went off like a rocket, saying that she would kill that bitch, Hazel Savage, if she upset her mum. Fred took his wife into the hall to calm her down. He told me to go upstairs and stay out of the way. Rose later explained to the police that he'd sought something out. With Rose out of the room, Fred came back into the lounge, where the police were wondering what was going on. "Can we go to the police station?" he asked Savage. When they got into the police car, Fred made an unexpected and dramatic admission. He had killed Heather. His daughter was buried in the garden, but the police were looking in the wrong place. An urgent message was sent to Fred's solicitor, Howard Ogden, who worked on his own out of a small office in Cheltenham, 9 miles from Gloucester, specialising in small legal aid cases. He advertised for clients on local radio with the slogan, "If you're nicked, call Oggy." A large, heavy-set man with a sardonic sense of humour who had just turned 40, Ogden was an expert on Griffon dogs and a familiar face at Crufts Dog Show. He knew Fred, having represented him in the child abuse case. However, he was very surprised to be told that his client was now under arrest for murder. "Keep your gob shut, Fred, until I get there," he told him when he got him on the phone. "Oh, I've already told him I did it." Meanwhile, Rose had been arrested on suspicion of murder and taken to Cheltenham police station. She was represented by another local solicitor, Leo Goatley, who was a couple of years younger than Ogden. Like the Wests, Goatley had a large family, though he was the opposite of his client in all other respects, a gentle, arty intellectual who painted in his spare time. In addition to their solicitors, Fred and Rose had the support of volunteers known as appropriate adults. Fred had poor literacy skills and could appear slow-witted, so the police called upon a volunteer to sit in on his interviews to make sure that he was okay and understood what was going on. His appropriate adult was Janet Leach, a mother of 5 in her 30s, studying to be a social worker. She had no experience of a murder case. Janet Leach and Howard Ogden were both present at Gloucester Central Police Station when Fred was interviewed just before 5 p.m. by D.C. Savage and D.C. Darren Law, a lanky detective in his 20s. Leach and Ogden sat with Fred at the Formica table in the soundproof room facing the police officers, who sat with their backs to the door. An NEC analog tape deck was switched on, its microphone picking up everything that was said in the room after the warning beep. The spools of 2 cassette tapes started to turn, creating a working copy and a duplicate, which was sealed and could be referred to if the master tape was ever challenged. They had 45 minutes before the tapes ran out, at which point they would have to stop the interview and restart with a new set of tapes. At the start of each session, the officers stated the time and date and asked everybody in the room to identify themselves for the record. Then they began. Fred seemed almost bursting to tell the story of how Heather had decided to leave home with the help of the woman in the miniskirt who drove a Mini. Right, what happened was, he began, as he would begin many of his speeches in custody when he had prepared what he wanted to say. Heather was going to leave home the day before, he said, and we stopped her and said, give it the night to talk it over with us because you're too young to leave home anyway, and we'll talk it over, right? Well, we talked it over most of the night. Heather went down to bed because she slept with May in the same room as May, and Heather cried all night. She wanted to leave home. So the next morning, May come up and told Mam and told me that Heather had cried all night, and Heather looked as though her had a rough night. So Rose said, let her go. Fred didn't give the police his daughter's biography clearly and concisely. He was almost incapable of telling a straight story and was a selfish man who never remembered his kids' birthdays, even mixed up their names. But the facts were these. Heather West was born in 1970, when Rose was 16 and Fred was 29, 2 years before Fred and Rose married. She was their eldest child, though Fred had a daughter and a stepdaughter by his previous marriage. By 1987, there were also 7 younger siblings. Heather lived her whole life in Gloucester, attending St Paul's Primary School and Hucklecote Secondary School, which she left in 1987. She was an independent-minded, sometimes naughty girl who was caught shoplifting when she was 11. However, she was also studious. Her ambition was to do well enough at school so she could leave home as soon as possible. Her dream, unusually, was to live as a hermit in the Forest of Dean, a secluded and beautiful place not far from Gloucester, where the Wests sometimes took their kids for a day out. Heather wrote, Forest of Dean, I will live, in her school books. In the summer of 1987, having passed 8 GCSEs, Heather applied for a cleaning job on a holiday camp in Devon. Her siblings recall that the job fell through at the last minute, which was why she cried all night. She was last seen alive the following morning, Friday, the 19th of June, at 8 a.m., just before Steve and May left for school. Rose would normally take the little ones to primary school at 8:30 before returning home. It was raining hard that morning, tipping down, Fred told the police, too wet even for Fred to work. Fred had worked like a Trojan all his life, manual work, labourer, driver, factory worker, currently a maintenance man for Carson Contractors. Heather had packed her bags. By Fred's account, she intended to go against her parents' wishes. Fred continued. Rose said, I want to go shopping or something, and I said, don't hurry back. Give me a chance to talk to Heather, right? So anyway, Heather had her stuff in the hallway. Now, whether this girl with this red Mini was going to pick her up, I don't know. Father and daughter argued, and she's standing there against the dryer with her hands on her hips like that, against the washing machine, you know, the big lady business. Fred then veered off topic, saying that Heather threatened to give drugs to her siblings unless he let her go. I'd already known that she'd give drugs to Barry. Barry, then aged 7, had a totally different memory of Heather. He recalled a kind older sister who disappeared one day from a house in which they all lived in terror of their parents. My first memories, I know it sounds really sad, but my first memories have got to be being beaten by my mum, he said. Fred said, "So that was it. Heather stood there and she had a smile and a sort of smirk on her face like, 'You try me, I'll do it' business. I lunged at her like that and grabbed her round the throat. She didn't bring her arms up to stop me, and I grabbed her round the throat like that, and I held her for a minute. How long I held her for, I don't know. I can't remember. I just remember lunging for her throat, and the next minute she's gone blue. I looked at her, and I was shaking from head to foot. What the heck had gone wrong?" He claimed that he had tried to revive his daughter. "I put her on the floor," he said, "blowed air into her mouth and that, and pumped on her chest, and she just kept going bluer. I didn't know what to do. Rose was due back. I never intended to hurt her. I just went to grab her, to shake her and say, 'Take that stupid smirk off your face,' because I was going to smack her across the face. But she was just flat out, so I thought, geez, I got to do something." He tried to put his daughter in the dustbin, but she wouldn't fit. So he took her body into the downstairs bathroom and fetched a serrated Iceland knife from the kitchen. Fred said, "One of those big ice saws for cutting big blocks of ice. So I cut her legs off with that, and I'm telling you, I have lived that 1,000,000 times doing that since then. And then I cut her head off." He started to cry. Through this tempest of tears, he continued his story as if what he was saying was almost reasonable. "Then I put her in the bin and rolled it down to the bottom of the garden behind the Wendy house and covered it up and left it there." He wore Wellingtons for the dismemberment and used the garden hose to wash the blood off his boots after. He then gathered up his daughter's belongings, including her books and the bags she had packed to go away, and put her things out in St. Michael's Square for the dustman, who happened to be his brother. Then Rose come back, must have been an hour or more later, and she said, "Oh, didn't you persuade Heather to stay?" or something like that. And I said, "No." I said she decided to go. As graphic as this confession was, there were gaps in Fred's story. While his daughter wanting to leave home to take up a job didn't look like a motive to commit homicide. Fred had not admitted to murder, only to killing his daughter. By his account, it was a dreadful accident. This didn't ring true. Barry argued that his parents had secrets they were frightened Heather might share with outsiders. He was always threatening, if we told anybody anything, he would kill us. But Heather wanted to leave, said Barry. He couldn't risk it, so he murdered her. Continuing his confession, Fred told the police that he sent Rose out to sleep with another man that evening, which was a peculiar aspect of their marriage. While Rose was out with this man, Fred didn't name him, he dug a hole in the garden, took Heather out of the bin, which he sluiced out with the hose like a labourer cleaning up on a building site, then buried her remains by the conifers. Later, he extended the patio from the back door to the fence at the bottom of the garden, so Heather was now under the pink and yellow paving slabs of the patio. D.C. Savage showed Fred a photograph of his garden, asking him to identify the exact spot. Said Fred, "that's just a blur." D.C. Savage said, "I'll go and get your specs." Detective and killer spoke with the familiarity of old adversaries, almost friendliness. But in the next moment, the conversation reverted to horror as Fred showed Savage where, on the photo, he dug the hole. D.C. Savage asked him, "And what's going to be in this hole in the ground?" "Heather." "In how many pieces?" "3. "What?" said D.C. Savage. "2 legs, and a head and a body. But the thing I'd like to stress, Rose knew nothing at all. Once Rose finds out about this, I'm finished." He described how he removed Heather's head and legs, twisting the legs round and cracking them off like drumsticks. I mean, I can still hear that in my sleep. I wake up very often screaming. I can hear it going crack. Having listened to this appalling confession, Fred's solicitor, Howard Ogden, the appropriate adult, Janet Leach, and the two police officers, Hazel Savage and Darren Law, were all in shock. A cup of tea was suggested. They went upstairs to the canteen on the top floor of police headquarters, the windows of which had a view across the city rooftops to the nearby cathedral. As we were just gathering in that little tea room, we had this silent group hug, says Ogden. Complete strangers, the two police officers, the appropriate adult, and me. It was the matter-of-factness when he was giving this horrendous account. So that was one way in which we coped, this silent group hug. In contrast to her husband, Rose West was not admitting anything in Cheltenham, where she was accompanied by her solicitor, Leo Goatley, and her appropriate adult. Sullen and resentful, Rose kept her answers short, and when pressed, she said that she couldn't remember. DS Terry Onions told her, "I'm telling you, and we're on tape, Mr. Goatley's here, I'm telling you, Fred has confessed to murdering Heather." "What?" said Rose. "That automatically implicates you," said Onions. "Why does it automatically implicate me?" "I'm just saying our suspicions are aroused that you are implicated, that you are involved in it." Rose replied, "It's a lie." At 6:34 that evening, when it was dark, Fred was taken back to 25 Cromwell Street by detectives Savage and Law. It was raining again and the ground was sodden. A small man of 5 feet 5.5 inches, weighing 11 stone, Fred cut a sinister little figure in the light of the police lamps, handcuffed to DC Law, a filicide returning to the scene of his crime. The searchers stopped work to watch as Fred indicated where he had buried his daughter by stepping on a patch of mud with his boot, then turning to grin at the police and Janet Leach as if to reassure them that he was a good bloke, really. That evening, Rose was interviewed again. DS Onion suggested to her that it was implausible that she could have lived in a small house with Fred all these years and not know that he had killed their daughter, cut her up, and buried her in their garden. Either you're blind, extremely naive, or totally trusting of your husband, or you're a liar, he said. Rose replied, "Or I was sent out." "Sorry?" said DS Onions. "Or I was sent out," she said. Her alibi was that Fred sent her out to stay the night with other men who paid her for sex. Fred controlled her, and now that Rose knew the truth about her husband, she felt very foolish. She used another expression. Rose said, "I feel a bit of a cunt, to be blunt with it." DS Onions replied, "What's your feelings now towards Fred, then? What are you feeling now? Put it this way, he's a dead man. If I ever get my hands on him, he's finished." The relationship between Fred and Rose West was at the heart of this murder case. As the investigation moved into its third day, the police tried to work the couple out. Rose wasn't being at all cooperative, so that made their relationship with Fred vitally important. He was an unusually affable suspect who talked a lot but didn't necessarily tell the truth. They would have to figure out how his mind worked. It was the start of a journey into almost unimaginable depravity and horror.
I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.